He said, "Today I declare a war on poverty, and our goal is total victory." And you would have cheered, because he was basically saying, look, third world poverty is right here, it's in America. Just look. But there's a solution. We're declaring war and we're going to win. He gets back to Washington, D.C., and he puts a general in charge of the war on poverty, a great American patriot named Sargent Shriver, who also created the Peace Corps. And when he was asked what the goal was, Sargent Shriver said, "Our goal is dignity, not doles." I don't care what your politics are. You're totally down with that, I know it. Not making people dependent, making people have a sense of their own dignity. That's really what we're all about. Isn't that what we want? Okay. So the question is, how did it turn out? That word dignity I want you to have in your head, because what is the essence of a life of dignity? It's not being helped. It's not being a charity case. It's earning your own success. It's having meaning and purpose. It's to be needed. Like I said, I've got a house full of teenage kids, right? They don't always like me, but they need me. And that's the source of dignity for me. That's a source of meaning and purpose in my life. It's the reason that after I leave California, I'm going back to Maryland where I live, and I'm looking forward to that because I want to go where I'm needed. It's really important to me. It's important to you too. It's important to all of us. Now, what happens in society when something has gotten so blinkered in the way that we take care of poverty that we tell generations of people that they're not necessary anymore? We're going to help you, but we don't need you. That's actually what's happening today. I mean, the data are overwhelming. When I was a kid, about 7% of men, able-bodied, working-age men, were out of the workforce. And I grew up in Seattle, a working-class neighborhood in Seattle, and we would see kind of guys, certain guys who would not work, and it would be a pity, and you'd say, that's not right. So what is it today? It's closer to 18% of working-age, able-bodied men aren't in the workforce. That's what happens when we do help, but we don't think seriously about how to make people needed in our society. That's what we need to do in public policy. The solution is not how to help people more, it's how to need people more in public policy. If you want to know what the dysfunction comes from when we don't need people, look at the data on this. This is really incredible. There's a paper, an academic paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences last year, published by two economists at Princeton. It's a paper about demography, and most of it is good news. I mean, every group, every age group, every demographic group in society has been getting richer for 100 years, has been dying later, and had better public health for 100 years. Here's the bad news. One group has turned against that trend. From 1999 until today, one group has been dying younger with greater health pathologies than they were before. That group are white men, 45 to 54, without a college education. They are dying younger and younger for three reasons. Number one is a 46% increase in cirrhosis of the liver, a 78% increase in suicide, and a 323% increase in drug overdose deaths. These are guys my age, but without a college education. That's an epidemic. It's a problem of despair, which is the inverse of dignity. And the lack of dignity comes from whole generations of people who are not needed. Okay, so what's the solution to all this? To think differently. If you want to solve the problems of poverty, and you want to solve them permanently, and you want to solve them in a way that you would deserve to be treated, don't think about better ways to help poor people. Think about better ways to need poor people. Now, I'm at Google right now. You solve problems. You solve hard problems. If you're a social activist, if you want permanent solutions to greater justice, think about how that one gets solved. Don't think about just how we can make people with high educations and high spending capability more productive, the top 10% of the income distribution. I'm already productive, and so are you. I don't need to be any more productive. I'm maxed out, man. Think about how we can bring greater productivity to the bottom third of the population socioeconomically. What are we doing for them to bring them into full citizenship? Because when we make people more productive, they are needed more. Stop thinking about poor people as charity cases. Start thinking of poor people as potentially productive human assets, the same way that we talk about rich people's kids. How do we do that? I don't know. But that's what I'm thinking about these days. And the way to think differently is to move from help to need. Now, before I move on, you know, it's easy, I'm talking a little too much about them, but let's think about you too, about how much it's important for you to be needed. And let's put a real face on it about what happens to people's lives when they're needed. I do a lot of work as president of AEI. When we're doing work in a particular area, I like to talk to the people that we're affecting. Looking at a data set is not sufficient. So fairly recently, I was at a homeless shelter in New York City that has amazing outcomes because it's all of their outcomes are based on work. They take these guys and they've been in prison and they've been drug addicted and they're homeless and they've abandoned their families and it's just like the worst situation, the situation you can't really help. And they put them to work, sweeping the streets, and then they have minimum wage jobs and they learn skills and they have amazing outcomes. So people don't go back to prison very often and they don't go back and live on the streets very often. So I want to know what their success is all about. And I'm meeting these guys. And I meet this guy who he went to prison when he was 18 for murder, of all things. But it was a weird thing. You know, he had smoked a lot of dope when he was in junior high and then went to harder drugs and he was running with a bad crowd. And one thing led to another and there was a robbery and somebody got killed and he went to prison. Okay. He gets out, by the grace of God, 22 years later, he's on parole when he's 40. And he's basically starting his life at 40. And I see him 9 months after he's out of prison and off the streets, and he's working in this thing. He sweeps the streets for 3 months, then he gets a job at an exterminator agency. What fancy people call a dead-end job, but is not. It's a job, just like all of our jobs. And I ask him how his life is going, and he says, I'll show you. And he takes out his iPhone, which is pretty cool, but that's not the secret of happiness. But what he's showing me is he's got an email from his boss. And here's what it says. It says, emergency bed bug job, East 65th Street. I need you now. And I said, so what? He said, look at it again. He just said, I need you. That is the first time in my life anybody has said those words to me. That, my friends, is the source of meaning. You want to make people, you want to bring them into full citizenship, you want to give them happier lives, you want to permanently solve the moral problems of poverty. Make people needed.